We're back then today with another updated levelling guide for Last Epoch for patch 1.1. For today's video, we'll show off one of the quickest and easiest ways to level the Forge Guard Mastery from level 1 to 80. The build we're using is a spin to win, forged weapons and manifest armour setup. It takes advantage of buffs to both of these skills that we got with patch 1.1, as well as some nice new uniques as well. The levelling setup is exceptionally smooth. We have 0 skill swaps with this particular one. Now let's go in and let's start breaking it all down. We start off here with a breakdown of the general progression of this setup, and as mentioned, it really is nice and simple. Level 2, you'll want to start using Warpath as your main spender. At early levels you will run out of mana with this, and at that point you'll just jump back to using Vengeance, but we will solve our mana issues with this very quick. Level 4, you'll spec into Warpath, and later on in the video I'll talk about the nodes that you will be using for that. Round about level 16, you'll choose the Forge Guard Mastery. Level 16, you'll also spec into Forge Strike. This will help buff our forged weapons. At level 20, you'll spec into Void Cleave. At level 35, you'll spec into Manifest Armour. And then finally at level 50, you've got two options here. You can spec into Sigils of Hope. They will buff our Manifest Armour and our forged weapons because they are classed as allies, or alternatively you could go for Volatile Reversal as well. But that's the general progression. Let's go on now and talk about the stat priority for the build as well as useful levelling gear. For this next section here then, we'll run over useful levelling gear you want to keep an eye out for, and based on feedback from previous videos we'll also have a quick breakdown of priority stats that can help out with this setup. We start off here with damage stats then, so you've got minion damage. You can also go for minion physical damage or fire damage, but the best one to go is just generic damage because that will apply to all the attacks on your forged weapons and manifest armour. In regards to another stat that can help out, I would go for attunement. Now in testing it appears that strength doesn't actually affect your forged weapons. It looks like a lot of people are under the impression it does, but I've done a lot of testing on this. Couldn't move my damage numbers at all with it, so you want to go for attunement for a forged weapon setup. For some survivability with this build, even though we're not using a shield, we can get over 50% block chance, so if you can add to that even further, you've got block, and block effectiveness can be great, health can be great for yourself. For your forged weapons and manifest armour you have minion health, and then lastly I always love a bit of movement speed. It gets you through the levels quicker and it allows you to dodge attacks as well. So early game with this setup, the bulk of your damage will be coming through Warpath. However, later on you will move to your forged weapons doing most of the damage. So starting off, the Hammer of Laurent can be fantastic for yourself. This is equipable from level 1, really does a huge amount of damage for that level. We then have Harfernon's Vow, again equipable at level 1 and another fantastic starting weapon. So personally the ideal weapon I like here, and this is another common unique drop, this is the Dream Form, equipable from level 16, it gives you a real nice amount of damage. Some of it is void, but it still counts towards damage. You've got void penetration, you've got up to 20% block chance, so using this with the passive setup we'll look at later on in the setup we're using for Warpath, you can get close to 50 or 60% block chance without a shield when you're using this, and you've also got a nice amount of block effectiveness on it. But yeah, the Dream Form, fantastic one to use. Personally for this video I used this all the way up to level 80 for this leveling guide and it was still working pretty nice. I'll just mention for weapons, as we will be using Void Cleave as a skill here, you have to use a two-handed sword or axe, so just bear that in mind. If you don't use Dream Form or any of the other ones I've talked about, you want to find a base item that's a two-handed axe or two-handed sword to use. For the amulet slot here, we have the trusty Bleeding Heart. This one is equipable at level 4 and it provides you with a nice amount of survivability at early game. As you start to level up, the bulk of your damage will move from Warpath into your forged weapons, so that's where the Death Rattle can come in nice. Some nice boosts to minions, and this one is equipable at level 36. We have 3 options here for the body armour. You start off with the Kestrel, equipable at level 1, doesn't provide much defence but provides you with some movement speed, which I always put a high value on for levelling guides and for early game. At level 15 you can equip Uzral's Pride. This will give you some nice survivability, and on top of that, as we'll still be using Warpath as our main damage skill at that point, you've got additional strength which will boost the damage of Warpath as well. Finishing up the body armour, we have Titan Heart, equipable at level 41. It gives you additional armour, a whopping 15% less damage while you're using a two-handed weapon, as well as increased melee damage and increased health as well. For the ring slot here, we have 3 options. Starting off, we have Arboreal Circuit, equipable at level 1. If you have 2 of these with max rolls, that's an additional 36% movement speed you can gain. We then have a fantastic new item with patch 1.1, and I would say potentially hold off until you get 1 or 2 of these until you run this build. It will make it so much smoother. It's the Phantom Grip, equipable from level 14. They'll give you +2 to the level of your manifest armour and your forged weapons, 4% minion critical strike chance, and also they'll increase the duration of your forged weapons, so these are fantastic. The bottom modifier, as well as the stats of your gloves applied to your forged weapons, are up to 100% effectiveness, which can be really pretty crazy. If you feel that you do need a bit of survivability on your forged weapons or manifest armour, you can go for Ribbons of Blood. What makes this especially nice is the bottom effects where your minions cannot be crit. For the glove slot here, the fact that your Phantom Grip ring will allow your forged weapons to inherit stats in this slot, what you're looking for would potentially be melee attack speed increase, melee crit chance, and armor shred can be fantastic. If you're looking for a unique, just as a quick item to slot in there, then fighting chance can be nice. It's increased melee damage and also increased movement speed for your forged weapons. For the belt slot here, we have the Thorn Slinger. This is equipable at level 12. It gives you +1 to the level of physical skills, so early game this benefits Warpath, and it gives you increased movement speed. We then have another new item with patch 1.1. This is a Flight of Quetzere. This one will give you an additional evade charge. It lowers the cooldown on evade, and after using evade you'll gain haste as well. Another item that can give you a nice amount of movement speed early game is Advent of the Erased. Quite similar to the last item we looked at. The difference with these, in order to proc haste, what you do is you just have a nearby enemy die near to you. Finishing up here, we have a few idols that can be useful for this setup. You've got the Humble Idol, provides vitality and increased minion physical damage. We have the Grand Idol. This will give you up to 30% increased minion physical damage. And then finishing up, we have the Huge Idol. This can give you an increase to the Sigils of Hope duration, but the main reason I would go for this is that up to 45% increased minion fire damage. So that is a breakdown of the stat priority and the leveling gear. Here's a quick infographic once again, so you've got it all on one screen. Feel free to take a screenshot of this. For the next section now, what we'll do is we'll talk about useful blessings. With patch 1.1 then, we've seen a nice change to the blessing system where it acts as a library, giving you far easier access to blessings. For that reason, for this section we'll cover the different monoliths that provide a stat boost for your character and I'll run over the best stat to go for. So from Fall of the Outcast, you're looking for experience. From the Black Sun, I would go for health or health gain on block. We then have End in the Storm. I would recommend health regen. From Reign of Dragons, you can go for melee damage, leech, crit avoidance, all resistances, or minion all resistances. Quite a few options there. From the Age of Winter, you can go for block chance and block effectiveness. And then for Spirits of Fire, you would go for shred fire resistance, or alternatively, and probably preferably, you can go for minion damage as well. So that's the blessings. Let's talk about the passive point allocation now. For this section here then, we'll use the Awesome Build Planner and Last Epoch tools. There's a link to this description with the passive tree progression all baked into it on that website. So feel free to check that out. For this video though, what we'll do is we'll quickly run over the nodes that I'm using. I will mention just very quickly with this setup, we're not really going for strength at all because forged weapons don't scale with that, despite what the tooltip may suggest. I've tested it and they most definitely don't. And where we can pick up block for 1 or 2 points, we will look to do that as well, even though we're not using a shield. But for the points here, we've got 5 points into Fearless. That will give you 5 vitality, increased health regen. 9 points into Relentless. It's got increased damage, so that will apply to both you and your manifest armor and forged weapons. Wherever you can find a standard damage that will apply to all of them, you want to go for that, so that's fantastic. We have 5 points into Armor Clad. We choose this for the bottom modifier, so you take 10% less damage from nearby enemies. And we have 1 point into Stalwart. It gives us 3% block chance for 1 point, so that's pretty nice. We then move on to the Forge Guard tree. We have 5 points into Weapon Master. Yes, I mentioned a moment ago that your forged weapons don't scale from strength, but this is a leveling build, so early game the strength will actually benefit your warpath, so that's the reason we go for that. None of the other nodes that are available here, you can see them, are really worthwhile investing more points into. We do however put 1 point into Steel Aegis for that 3% block chance. We've got 4 points into Unflinching, that will give you bonus health and your minions gain stun immunity, so that's great. We have 5 points into Guardian, that's giving you additional health as well. We have 5 points going into Smelter's Might, so that will give you and your minions a 35% bleed and ignite chance, that's doubled when you use a two-handed weapon. We have 5 points into Hammer and Anvil, it gives your minions armor shred chance, that's fantastic for your forged weapons, and also the 4 bonus point bonus when we use Void Cleave, we'll get that bonus, which is really pretty amazing. Now at that point we actually want to jump over to the Paladin tree. So we want to put 15 points into Paladin here so we can unlock Sigils of Hope. Alternatively, if you're using Volatile Reversal, you'll put 5 points into Void Knight instead. But for this particular setup, I do prefer Sigils of Hope. So we have 8 points into Defiance, that gives us attunement, and the health and the damage of both our Manifest Armour and Forged Weapons will scale from this. We have 1 point here that gives us an additional 2% block chance. 6 points into Valour, it's a nice amount of health that gives you, it's 90 health, and that takes you up to the 15 points in order to unlock Sigils of Hope. So at that point we then jump back to the Forge Guard tree. So we now have the second half of the Forge Guard tree. We've got some really nice bonuses here. We have 8 points into Iron Attunement. It gives you Attunement, Armour and Minion Armour, and also you can see it's got a nice threshold bonus. We have 10 points going into Forged Steel, that will give your Manifest Armour and Forged Weapons a nice flat damage boost. We have 1 point into Flawless Defender, allows us 1 point into Walls of Solarium, it gives us the 3% block chance, but the main reason we're really going for that is for Shield Crafter. So with this we get 200% increased minion health and 200% increased minion armour. That really helps with keeping your minions up. We then finish up here with Avatar of War, so we've got 8 points going into that, and it will give you shared increased fire damage and physical damage up to 64% there. So that is the passive trees. Let's look at the specialised skills now. The first specialised skill we have here is Warpath. Early game you will be doing damage with this, but by and large you are using this to proc and create your forged weapons. So if we look at the point allocation, 2 points into Unchained and 1 point into Reckless Spin. This will solve any mana issues you would have. It allows you to channel this 100% of the time. 2 points into Molten Path allows you 2 points into Way of the Executioner, so we can get to Forge Master Stance. That's the important node here. That's the one that allows you to spawn your forged weapons. This one here, Moving Forged, allows you to spawn them even quicker, so you want to max these out as soon as you can. With the remaining points, what I would do, because we're not really using Warpath for damage, it's more of a utility skill, so what I would do is 1 point into Iron Reach, and then 5 points into Juggernaut Stance. It gives us a whopping 20% block chance and a decent 500 block effectiveness. If you use this alongside Dreamform and the passive point allocation we looked at a moment ago, you'll have around about 50% block chance while you're leveling without a shield, which is just absolutely bonkers. With the one remaining point, movement speed is always nice, so I would put it into Quicksilver Wind. We then have Forge Strike. We won't really actively be using this. Earlier on, before you have the ability to generate forged weapons with Warpath, you may use it now and again, but I find later game as we start to progress with the leveling setup, we just don't need to use the skill at all in order to get our forged weapons. The point allocation anyway, you get 4 points into Forged by Fire, so that's a nice buff to your forged weapons. We have 4 points going into Well Forged Weapons. This increases your duration and allows you to have another 4 of them. 1 point into Forge Master. This can convert the forged weapons to great axes, where they do more damage and hit over a larger area. 5 points into Heavy Strike. That's got the more multiplier of 40% for your forged weapons. 5 points into Engine of War. This increases the area of your forged weapons attacks. And then we've got 1 point left. I would like to have more, but with the 1 point we've got left for this setup, I would put it into Light Forge, and it gives us increased attack speed for our forged weapons. The next ability we have here is Void Cleave. This will deal a decent amount of damage, but we are using it really to buff the forged weapons. So we have 1 point into Rift Flame, this converts this to fire. We have 1 point into Hellish Chasm, that gives you the full fire conversion on this skill, and it allows us 5 points into Molten Blades. So this will give our forged weapons a massive buff. Now, if you like what you can actually do, it makes the skill a little bit trickier to use, but if you place 1 point here, it means the buff that we looked at a moment ago will be 150% more effective. However, your Void Cleave has to hit the minions in order for them to get that buff. So personally, for this setup, I prefer just to keep it as it is, which is the 5 points into Molten Blades. We then move down here. We have 5 points into the depths. This increases the area on this skill, so you're more likely to hit target and get the buff for your forged weapons. 1 point into Precognition allows us 3 points into Riftmaker. We're taking that for the crit vulnerability stacks that it adds to your enemy. So your enemy will be more likely to take a crit and you'll be buffing your forged weapons at the same time. So when you use this, you'll notice a massive damage increase. You've also got the passive point allocation that we talked about earlier on, where you gain additional, I think it's around about 20 or 30% attack speed when you use this ability, because it costs more than 20 mana. So yeah, this will really up the damage on your forged weapons. Last little node we have here, because I had a point left, I went for Blazing Steel for this particular one. But let's check out the next skill. We have our second summon skill here. We have Manifest Armour. With the setup we're running here, we would place points into Iron Grasp. I only put 1 point in it first, but eventually I will max it out. But 1 point in it to start off allows us 3 points into this node, that then allows us 1 point into Titan Sword. So your Manifest Armour gains a sword that scales with your own equipped weapon stats. We then have points going into Plate Mail. That'll give it a nice increase in armour, and also points going into Forge of Impact. Based on the armour you have on your main slot, you can increase the physical damage of the Manifest Armour, and this can really ramp up based on your own armour. We've got 3 points into Steel Greaves here, so they gain stats from your boots. 3 points into Great Helm, so they'll gain stats from your helmet. But this is what was changed with patch 1.1, so the effective damage in this was massively increased, and the cooldown was changed from 10 seconds to 4 seconds. And via your boots and the stats that are inherited on them, you can pull the cooldown even lower. So this is Whirlwind Strike. This will hit really hard now. The final skill that I would use here, and as mentioned, you can go for this or Volatile Reversal, but I would go for Sigils of Hope. This will give us a nice buff to our forged weapons and Manifest Armour and ourselves in regards to offense and defense. We don't actually have to cast it with the setup we're using either, so you can just keep spinning and generating your weapons. But we have 5 points into Empowering Sigils, so that's increased damage you're getting there. 1 point into Last Wish, and this is what gives you the chance to actually generate these while you're spinning away, so you don't have to stop. We've got 3 points into Decree Flame, so that's additional fire damage, which is great for our forged weapons, also our Manifest Armour, and actually ourselves as well. We have 5 points into Iron Sigils, some survivability via Endurance Threshold. 4 points into Enduring Hope, increases the duration of signals, and then we've got 1 point into Tetragram, so this one will give you 1 increased sigil. Finishing up, we have 1 point left. I would drop that into Burning Sign, and that gives us a little bit of Ignite chance for both ourselves and our forged weapons as well. So that is everything you need to know for leveling the Forge Guard Mastery in record time in patch 1.1 for Last Epoch. It's a mastery that's seen some pretty nice improvements with patch 1.1, and I'll most likely do an endgame guide for this one as well, so if you would like to see that, then do let me know in the comments below. But I hope this has been helpful. Bear in mind there are lots of other leveling guides for the different masteries on the channel as well, so feel free to check them out. But thanks for tuning in for this one. I'll see you all again soon.